Hello, everyone. We are back live on the Sota stream. We are live here with Kevin Gorg, the on-ice reporter for the Minnesota Wild at Fox Sports North. Kevin, how have you been doing in quarantine without hockey?
Yeah, it's a bummer. We're missing it. No doubt about it. We'd be deep into the playoffs by now. And
Yep.
watching a lot of the old games, it reminds you how much you love the game, how much you love the playoffs. And what we're missing right now, like everybody else, I kind of lose track of my days, as I told you guys before we went live here.
Yeah.
The sports calendar week by week always kind of marks where you're at. And, whether it's the season with the Masters, which we lost last month, now the Kentucky Derby this weekend, there are certain parts of either the weekly or monthly calendar that sports signify, and without it right now, we just have we have no template for what's next. We're just kind of waiting in limbo here.
Definitely.
100%. We just had Michael Russo on, and he did want us to ask you some questions. So the very first one he wanted us to ask you, he wanted to know if you had COVID-19 in January. Is this true?
No, I will tell you, though, I was really sick. I don't get sick very often, and I had influenza A, and it really knocked me off my feet. In fact, there were a couple of Wild games where I could feel something coming on, and then we luckily had a little break in the schedule. I never left the bed for 3 days. So he likes to tease that I was one of the first ones to have it, but I did go in and get checked out. It was influenza A. And if you've ever had that, it's not just your typical flu. It does kick your tail pretty good. And I knew Mike was going to come with something about that. He is a beauty, that guy.
Well, what's the difference between influenza A and just the normal flu?
It's just the severity of it.
Oh, okay.
You run a higher temp. It's tough to keep anything down. And, for a guy like me that travels a lot, I was really fortunate that it happened in between road trips. We're gone so much that time of year. And it is, you talk about COVID-19 and sports and how it ties into our daily lives. But, I'm sure Michael might have touched on it. We were in Anaheim when we played our final Wild game that first week in March. And Ottawa had been to the rink that day and left all their gear right outside our locker room. They were coming in to play the Ducks later that week. I think it was on that Tuesday. We played a Sunday night overtime game where Fiala had the winner. And Ottawa had all their gear there, had all their guys there all day long, and we share the same working space. And 5 or 6 of their guys had COVID-19. And to my knowledge, and I've circled back with Lepanto, Dan Myers, Michael Russo, all the guys, none of us have had the COVID-19. So it's ironic that Ottawa was there, same building, same workspace, but we escaped without getting it, as far as we know.
Yeah, and that's weird because I've heard of stories of people saying, though, like, I think I had COVID in December, but it wasn't well known. I've heard people saying that, so I mean it's interesting. Yeah.
You wonder, right? Because it's an unknown commodity, and you don't know. Like, not everybody has the symptoms.
Yeah.
Not everybody gets to the point where they have to go into the doctor. I've had some friends that have had it here in the last 6 weeks, and other than being quarantined in their own house, just high fever, achiness. I think day by day, week by week, I feel really good about what we've done here in Minnesota. I think that we've been able to kind of get past the worst of it. But you worry right now. I've got my parents who are 80 and 78 respectively, and we're real careful. We're talking about Mother's Day now. Easter's come and gone. We did no celebration there, and it's hard because that's what my parents look forward to.
Yeah.
I've got 3 girls. They've got 8 grandkids in total, and Mother's Day we're talking about. If it's nice, they've got a pool in their backyard, maybe hanging out, be able to drop by and say hi to mom and stuff. But you have to limit what you do, even with family right now, because you just don't want anybody that's over a certain age or has any of those underlying tendencies that would be vulnerable to it, to have to pass it on, because you might be having it, carrying it, and no one might know. And so I really appreciate what you guys are doing on this platform all weekend long. The more money we can raise, the better. There are people right now that are in a really bad spot that really need it. So congrats on what you guys are doing, and I'm very happy to be part of this great charitable cause this weekend you guys have put on.
Yeah, we want to thank you again for coming on. But I also, you mentioned Dan Myers, and this leads me to another question Russo wanted me to ask you. He wanted me to ask, in quarantine, he wanted me to ask if you miss Dan Myers or the Minnesota Wild more.
Dan and I are tight. We're seatmates on the flights on our charter with the Wild, and we share a fantasy hockey team together. I miss the Wild more. And I do text and talk with Dan a lot more than people like Michael know. But, Russo's got Lepanto, his little man crush there. They spend a lot together. I've got my guy, Dan Myers. And maybe, who knows, with Anthony on him on Twitter, maybe there's some really good leftovers that Anthony saves up for Mike, because I know he's not much of a cook. And, we know how good Lepanto is. We get to see his tweets on a daily basis on that grill on Shoreview. Hopefully, they're keeping their little romance alive, their bromance, I should say, with some leftovers from Lepanto's grill.
Have you ever been invited to a Lepanto grill out?
I have, and I will say they are fantastic. Very few and far between. The tradition for us is we go over there on Super Bowl Sunday, and it's not much of a grill situation as it is him making some of his famous pasta or chili. I will give it to Anthony. He's Italian, and like a lot of Italians, he knows his way around the kitchen. We've done the bocce ball thing in the summer and done some stuff with our Twins broadcast crew where he's been able to grill out for us. And, I know Fallness is still waiting. But this Kevin has been there, and I will say it's worth the trip.
Yeah, I think we were mentioning when we were talking to Kevin, and Lepanto said yesterday, he's like, yep, Kevin has never been over, or Fallness has never been there. He doesn't meet the standards. And then Kevin Fallness, we asked him about, we're like, we're going to have to sneak there with Gorg someday. You're just going to have to show up there with Kevin Gorg when he goes.
Yeah, Fallness, though, has been kind of on Twitter right now, coming back at Lepanto with some of his great cooking. And I know he did the bone-in ribeyes. He looked like Fred Flintstone holding that thing up a couple nights ago. So maybe Lepanto has inspired Fallness. Maybe TV and radio have meshed together organically to create these two great chefs and or grill masters. Because Fallness looks like a nice apprentice, and he's taken some big steps this year, learning from Mr. Lepanto, who's kind of at the head of that class.
Is it true that the TV guys and the radio guys kind of have a friendly rivalry going on then?
Well, Fallness does that. That's all him and his feisty ways. I mean, Tom and Bob are the nicest guys on the planet, but Fallness is always taking shots at us on Twitter, mute the TV this, give me my interview that. But when it gets right down to it, it's a great traveling party. We have a lot of fun together. And, Kevin has made a couple of trips recently because, Bob has taken some road games off. And it's been fun to have Kevin Fallness on the air. And sometime, if you have them back together for a conversation, you should ask him about Nashville, because nobody owns Nashville like Kevin Fallness after what I saw a couple years ago.
And what was that? Why do you say that?
Well, Nashville's got a lot of honky-tonks, the live music and the libations. And let's just say Kevin Fallness, who doesn't get on the road a lot, made up for lost time. And he took Nashville by storm. Now, the next day, Kevin Fallness looked like somebody that had fought Marcus Foligno. He was a little light on his feet, couldn't quite answer the bell as quickly as he would normally. But to his credit, he did come back and fire a bullet that night on play-by-play doing radio. But Nashville, like Las Vegas, can sneak up on the youngsters and maybe the rookies, and Fallness got a little taste of that 2 seasons ago.
We talked to Audra Martin yesterday, and she actually said that Nashville is an amazing hockey town. Do you agree with that?
It's turned into that. When we first started traveling down there, it was decent. But after their couple big playoff runs, including that cup run 3 years ago, it's transformed into an awesome hockey town. They're crazy about the Predators. The building is jam-packed every single night. It's loud. It's a really fun place to watch a hockey game. And if you're a Wild fan looking to do some road trips, that would be one of the trips I would take to be near the top. I mean, Vegas for sure, Chicago, the Rangers at Madison Square Garden. But I'll tell you, Nashville's sneaky good, no doubt about it.
Yeah, it was huge seeing like the resurgence a couple years ago, and you're kind of like as a Wild fan, you're like, dang it! I mean that should be us in the Central Division moving up, and the team out of Tennessee is doing well. I know location really doesn't mean anything in the end because you get players from all over, but I mean from Minnesota fans, I was a little bothered by that. It just sucks.
It does. You want the cup run, and they had that a couple years ago. It'd be hard not to be jealous of them because we've always been able to compete with that team, and so. You know what? I think that what we saw this year when we saw the Minnesota Wild, they certainly looked like they had taken some strides with their younger players. We're excited about the progress that Cunnin and Greenway are making. Really excited about what we saw from Kevin Fiala. And for me now, if we get the Russian kid into the fold for next year, you've got a pretty good core of young players. I still love the blue line. I think the blue line is kind of the anchor of this hockey team, and our top four is as good as any in the league. So I'm excited about where this team is headed, where they could be going. And I do think that Nashville had their window, and I don't know that right now I would trade rosters with anybody if it's Nashville or Minnesota, because I think the Wild are better set up for the next 5 years. Where the Predators kind of had their window, had their chance, came up short against the Penguins. So, yeah, it was tough to watch, but I think right now I'd rather have this Wild roster.
In your opinion, who won the trade between Minnesota and Nashville, Granlund for Fiala?
Well, early on, I would have said it was a landslide for Nashville. It took Fiala a while, even last year when he came into camp this year to get it going. And Granlund's always been a pretty consistent player. You could count on Granlund for 50 to 65 points, power play minutes, great passing skills. If you need him to help out some wingers that can shoot the puck, he's a great distributor to the puck. That's kind of what he is, and I think that's who he's going to be moving forward. And it's still limited data from what we watched from Kevin Fiala this season. I think there's a much bigger ceiling there where this guy could be a 70 to 90 point guy, a guy that can score 35 goals in this league, a guy that can be one of those players that can bring you out of your seat. So, Granlund's a terrific player, and I think he's going to maintain that really solid first or second line center, first or second, unit for the power play type of player. But I think Fiala right now, and I think the Wild right now, wouldn't go back and do that deal again. I think it's a trade that's worked out pretty well for Minnesota, and hopefully Fiala can continue to build on what he did, because you can't just sit here right now and guarantee that that's the player he's going to be. It sure looks like he is, but you want to see it for a longer period of time. And I hope when the Wild come back, whether it's this summer or next fall, Kevin can continue to build on what he's done. And I really think the foundation is there for him to have a great career, but I still think he needs to prove it for a longer period of time.
Do you think that the season is going to continue this year, or do you think they're just going to move on to next season?
Well, I know Gary Bettman and the NHL are sure motivated to get it done, guys. They see that great opportunity with the Olympics now being postponed by a year to have all those NBC sports platforms to show playoff games. My only concern as I look at this from a broad brush perspective is don't cheapen the product. Don't cheapen what the playoffs mean, what it means to win a Stanley Cup. I still think you need to win 4 7-game series. You need to win 16 games. It needs to be a grind to get your name on the cup. Don't cheapen what that is and what that means for the guys that already have earned that and have their name on the cup. If you can do it, you can come back in June or July, or whatever this is, and you can make it count, then great. But I don't like the idea of changing the playoff format. I like the idea of shortening series. And I really don't like the idea of starting next November or December and then having next season start late and having to really make up for lost time and maybe shorten next year. So I think there are some big decisions to be made, and I think it'd be fun to have them come back. But let's not forget, if you come back in June or July and you start the season there, you still have to put in a good 2.5 months. You're going head-to-head with baseball. All of a sudden training camp starts. Then you're going against football. And I don't know if the juice would be worth the squeeze for the National Hockey League. I know they're going to look at that. But my biggest concern is if you have playoffs, if you have the season come back that we just watched, make sure you make everything count the same as it always has, where teams really have to earn that championship to get their names on the cup.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. We were talking with Felness yesterday, and he was mentioning how, if you're gonna bring, as much as fans want to see hockey come back, we'd like to see this season end. I mean, but you still want to do it right. You don't want to try to force a puzzle piece that doesn't fit. If I want to use an analogy there, don't just do it just to crown a champion. Do it right. And I think that I think it'd be worth it for them to maybe not even to resume the season, honestly. But I think that's a good point. As much as fans want to see it come back, I mean, you should be able to do it right. You shouldn't have to really do many big tweaks. So this champion is not any less than any other Stanley Cup champions that have won in years past.
Yeah, and the other factor I have is, being a longtime fan of this league, there is nothing more special than the atmosphere that playoffs create. And whether it's the whiteout in Winnipeg or some of the goal towels we've seen in different rinks, even like the XL Energy Center, I don't know how playoff hockey in an empty building is going to play out. To be honest with you, I'm not sure I want to see that. I know what the league is trying to do, and I know the TV dollars are great, and I respect that. I really do. But to me, to have a Stanley Cup playoff run and to not have fans, I just don't know how I feel about that and how much fun that would actually be. So, part of me kind of thinks, hey, we now know what we're up against. We know that slowly here into the summer, we're going to try to slowly get people back out and get the economy going. But maybe you wait until the actual start of next season. Mm-hmm. You say, you know what? This was a lost year. Mm-hmm. It's a bummer.
Yeah.
We're going to miss out on some of that TV revenue. When we come back, we're going to come back, have a normal time frame. We're at the end of September. We're going to gather. We're going to have a training camp. We're going to get into October. We're going to get the season going again. I can live with regular season hockey early next year in October if we still don't have fans in the building, because that we can adjust to. To me, though, Stanley Cup playoffs, no fans is a real big bummer, and I don't know that it's worth it. So I'm a little torn here because I love watching sports, and I would love to have hockey come back, and I think it'd be really cool. But if it's an empty building, I just don't know how much everybody's going to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and speaking of going on about Kirill Kaprizov, I mean, it is your job to interview players on and off the ice. I mean, how excited are you looking forward to potentially talking with him?
I think he's going to be a popular guy when he gets here. I think it's going to be a media storm. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've been thinking about and talking about this guy for a couple of years now. And, you watch the clips and you see the highlights. You watch him at the World Juniors, and everybody I talk to from Bill Guerin all the way through think this kid can come over and slowly but surely become a nice, really talented fixture in the offensive arsenal of the Minnesota Wild. So, yeah, I'd love to visit with him and to be there day one. It'd be so exciting for all of us that cover the Wild. It'd be so exciting for all of us that love the Wild. I mean, he's the type of player that along with Kevin Fiala right now, fans want to watch. They want to sit down and see what these guys can do. And it's funny because, you look forward to when this is all done and we can get back to a full building. Imagine the atmosphere next year. The Wild get off to a good start in October, and you've got Fiala building off what he did this year. You've got the Russian kid going nuts, and you got a team that maybe builds off what they did. I really thought the team took a step this year in the final 6 weeks of what we saw from the Wild season before it ended in March, and they really seemed to come together as a group. And for the first time in a long time, they looked like they were having fun every single day. Practice, buses, airplanes. This was a group that something changed through the course of this season. And maybe when you get your coach fired, that magnifies maybe how you have to kind of come together to say, we got to right this wrong. And it seemed to work. And young and old seem to be meshing really well together. And I think that creates a great atmosphere for those young players to feel comfortable, to feel good, and to get better. And I think we've really seen some of these young guys take noticeable steps. And I think by next year, you could have a team that along with the Russian kid and Kevin Fiala, you look at Luke Cunnin, you look at Greenway and some of these young players, people are going to want to watch, whether it's on our broadcast on FSN or in the building over in St. Paul. We get back to gathering again. There's a lot of excitement around this hockey team right now. So, yeah, it's going to be great. I just the sooner the better we get them over here, because it's one of those situations with the hurdles they have to overcome. Until they have him signed, I'm going to worry. I'm going to keep worrying, because that's what I like to do. Like Mike Russo, I like to create self-anxiety. And I want this kid to be a Wild player, and I want him to be good so badly that I'm going to continue to worry about that until we get him over here.
Let's say the NHL season does end up continuing this year. Many NHL players have not skated since their last team practiced. Do you think if they did continue the season, the first few games we have are going to be pretty sloppy hockey?
Yeah, think about preseason hockey. Think about what you see in those first couple of games, and I think it's going to be a mixed bag. And I do believe that the teams that can adjust to that schedule the best, the teams that have some guys that are able to work out right now, whether it's on their own at their house or, we heard from Kevin Fiala last week. He's in a situation where he can get some ice time and get out there and skate. Those teams will have a built-in advantage. But certainly if you look at preseason hockey and how inconsistent players are, it takes them a while to get going. Now, I've been able to, through some of our unscripted broadcasts we've been doing on FSN with some of these Zoomcasts, have conversations with Stalock, Dubnik. I've heard from Zach Parise, and they all believe within a week, 5 to 7 days of getting back and having a mini training camp, that they'd be ready to go. Now, it wouldn't be a completely polished product, but to me, that was pretty encouraging because, that seems like a real short period of time. But you have to remember, these guys are in the prime of their life. They're terrific athletes. And I do know that most of these guys are doing something here in the interim. They're not just sitting around the house eating chips. There's nothing to watch, especially during the day. A lot of them are out chasing their kids around. So, yeah, I do think they could do it. I just think that it would take a while for the product to get up to where it is. The other factor would be buildings are likely going to be empty. And I think the crowds create so much energy, not just for the home team, but for both clubs. I think if you've ever watched games in Florida when the Wild have played the Florida Panthers and seen how quiet that building is, that can be a bit sloppy too. I think those crowds can be a motivating factor. And so there'll be a lot of adjustments for team to make. Getting back up to speed physically is just one of them. You play in front of empty buildings, creating energy throughout that game and playing at a high level, I don't think will be as easy as it, just drop the puck out and go play. I think it's also going to be adjustment for these guys as well.
Yeah, it almost could feel like a scrimmage type atmosphere. And even though they're truly playing for the cup, I still feel like it'll feel kind of weird. Like if I was a player, I'd be like, this is just weird. I don't know if the same feeling would be there.
It'd be tough. I can tell you from experience, when I played in college at the University of St. Thomas, we played at the State Fairgrounds at the Coliseum. And if you go down there back in the day for section finals and White Bears playing Hill Murray and you pack the joint with 5,000 fans, it's a really cool place to watch hockey. But remember, when I played at St. Thomas, we had a couple hundred people there. And if you looked at that building back when you watched hockey there was a big gap between where the ice was and where the stands were. And it was incredibly quiet. And I'll tell you right now, at first it was really, really hard for us. But as we developed our home ice advantage, what we'd do is we'd lull teams to sleep. Teams would come in, and even in smaller buildings like at St. Olaf or up in St. John's, you put 300-400 people in those buildings, they were rocking. You come to the Coliseum, and if you're not ready to play, we'd jump them on the first 10 minutes and blow their doors out because that's what we were used to. But there is an adjustment for any hockey player at any level to play in that type of environment. Then you look at the conversation on the ice, and I mean this sincerely. Once in a while on our broadcast, if you're watching a game, you'll hear Lepanto step in and say, hey, we have to apologize. One of our mics near the rink picked up this, picked up that. That's with 17 to 20,000 fans in the building. You're going to pick up everything in an empty building. And so I think you have to be cognizant of that on the broadcast because you still want those mics down there. You still want the sound of the puck hitting the pipe or hitting the plexiglass, the sound of those body checks on the wall. You want all of that, but with that, you're going to get some pretty rough language as well. I'm just being honest. So there are going to be some hurdles to overcome on a lot of different levels.
That reminds me of when, for the Winter Classic, HBO does 24/7, and when Bruce Boudreau was coaching the Washington Capitals, so many people were surprised with that language in the locker room.
Well, if you know Bruce, you shouldn't have been surprised. He lets it fly, and that's just who he is. He wears his heart on his sleeve, and he became a rock star after that. That was the 24/7 that took that show to the next level, and then took Bruce Boudreau's fame to another whole plateau. And I loved having him here in Minnesota, loved getting to know him. And, he was a guy that truly just really cared about the team and the game, just loved hockey, loved being around the rink. When he'd go home, he'd just watch hockey. It's funny, you get to know these coaches, in our time covering the teams, and they've been so different. I mean, it's just dramatically different personalities, going back to Jacques Lemaire when I first started covering the team in 2006. Then you get into Todd Richards, a guy that I played against all my life and knew all the way through back when he played for the Gophers. And then you get into Mike Yeo and how buttoned up he was, and Torchetti and what a goofball he was. And now you get to Bruce and now Dean Evison. Every personality is so different. But what really is interesting to see for me is the passion that every one of those guys had for hockey and how much they cared about it, how much they put into it. As different as all of them were as individuals, every one of them was so dialed in to this team, this moment, this week of practice, this next goal. And I think that makes the coaches, especially at that level, those head coaches, so very special, is because they can get to that level where everything just consumes them. When they're at the rink, it is all in all the time. And, you mentioned Bruce Boudreau. He had that. I think Dean's the same way. And I think that's the other big question here that Bill Guerin's going to have to answer. If we don't finish the season that we had already started, is what is going to happen to Dean Everson, because the team seem to be really responding well to him and this coaching staff. You've got some guys on that staff that I think are really valuable. Bob Mason, our goaltending coach. You look at Darby Henderson, the value that he brings to this team on a daily basis, on and off the ice. He's behind the scenes, just a really good mentor to our young players. And so Bob Woods is beloved by a lot of those guys on the blue line. So, yeah, there's just so much unknown right now, and there'll be clarity. I'm certain either by the end of summer or the start of next fall, we're going to get that clarity. But when you look at the Wild right now, man, there are a lot of different tentacles to what we're going to be looking for, what we're going to be dialed into next year when we come back.
Now, kind of moving away from hockey a little bit, what have you been doing? Have you been doing any hobbies or anything in quarantine? I know you're a movie guy. You've been watching any new movies recently?
You know, it's funny. I think when you talk about what's the first thing you're going to do when we start to take that first step, getting back to normal, I'm going to go to the movie theater. I am a guy that go to 2 or 3 movies a week, whether I'm at home or traveling on the road for work. And so that's one of the first things I'll do. I've been watching movies. I've been watching a show called Ozark.
Oh,
Behind the Curve.
Recommend.
It's a fantastic show, and I think everybody I know has seen it. We just finished the 2nd season last night. I love it. Jason Bateman is so good on this show. And then I took up pickleball. I'm dressed in athletic gear right now because when I get done doing this today, there's a court over in Plymouth, and my nephews have dragged me into this a few months ago when this whole thing started, and now I've played for a couple of months, and I love it. So pickleball is big on my list. And other than that, the only sport going is horse racing. And, you know, this weekend we were watching the races from Arkansas. They had a pair of Arkansas Derby races to qualify for the Kentucky Derby, and saw 2 superstars and a horse called Charlatan and a horse called Nadal. And then I'm in constant communication with my guys from Canterbury, like Paul Allen and Jeff Madej, who runs the press box. And now we're going to get the backside where the horses and the people that take care of them live opened up here next week. And then horses will start to train. And hopefully by June, we're going to maybe have racing back in Shakopee, likely at the start without fans. So horse racing, Ozark, movies, and pickleball. And then we got 2 dogs here. Fenway and Brooks are a pair of Morkies that I spend a lot of time with. We do a 3-mile walk every morning, and then it's just constant fun with those guys throughout the day and into the night.
So you said that you watch 2 to 3 movies a week. So obviously you're a big movie guy. If you had to give us your Mount Rushmore, your top 4 movies of all time, what would they be?
Well, I would start with Hoosiers for me. Even though I'm a hockey guy, I'm a state tournament guy. And that movie to me reminded me the most of what it means to be a hockey player in Minnesota. You know, Indiana basketball is sacred. That tournament is remarkable, and I always love a good underdog story. And Gene Hackman, for the younger folks, is an actor that in the late 70s and throughout the 80s into the 90s was as good as it gets. So Hoosiers for me is right there. Shawshank Redemption is one of those movies that I think it has the quality where it deserves to be on a quote-unquote top 4 of all time. One of those movies that when it's on cable and you bump into it, you start watching it, it drags you in. It's a phenomenal story. And again, you get Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman and their chemistry and that friendship and the way it develops, to me, is as good as it gets. Now, you have to have different genres. And then if I'm going to go comedy, you got to go with Fletch. And Fletch is a movie that came out when I was in high school. On opening day, Marco Siki and I saw it 3 times. We were so excited. We went to the showing at noon at the Burnsville Center. We came back, and when the movie got over, and stayed for the 2:30. We went home, showered, had a double date that night, and took our dates back to that same theater for the 7 o'clock. Fletch is old school comedy gold. And then I guess if I had to pick the 4th on that slate, it'd be a really tough call. But for me, it's got to be horse racing because I'm a horse racing guy. And it's an offbeat, off-color movie, but it's called Let It Ride with Richard Dreyfuss. And I'm telling you, if you've been to Canterbury, if you've been to a horse race or even watched a race on TV and want to dive into what it really means to be a racetrack guy or gal, find the movie Let It Ride with Richard Dreyfuss. It's phenomenal. And it is one of those movies that it's a one-day story of these 2 cab drivers that bump into a tip from their passengers in the back of the cab about a horse that can't lose. And this guy who's down on his luck and has just been getting beat up at the track. His marriage is in trouble. And he has this remarkable day at the track. Terry Garr plays his wife, and she comes out there to try to spoil the party. Nothing is going to stop Richard Dreyfuss on this particular day. So there it is. Hoosiers, Shawshank Redemption, Fletch, and Let It Ride. I don't think it'll match anybody else's out there. There are a ton of movies I could have gone with, but those are my 4.
Yeah, that's a solid list. But I do have to ask, because I remember the last time we talked, at the time I think A Star Is Born was out, and you love talking about that movie. How many times did you see that movie?
Saw it 9 times in the theater, and before you get too wound up about that, remember now, after about the first 3 or 4 times, I would go back to it, but only stay until it got depressing, because I loved the first 90 minutes of that movie. The last 45 to an hour, when he kind of bottoms out there, Bradley Cooper, his character Jackson Maine, it got to be a little too much. What drew me in was the music. And then what I appreciated about A Star Is Born is you have a singer in Lady Gaga who can really act. I mean, she was phenomenal as the lead actress in that movie. And then you have an actor in Bradley Cooper that can really sing. And what you can't fake in a great movie is chemistry. And the chemistry that they had in that movie, I thought made it spectacular. And so, yeah, it's one of those movies I was in the back of my mind when you guys asked the question. It was certainly in the conversation for me. I've come back and watched it a couple times since then. I've got it downloaded here at home. And I love the music. And I love that first time she hits the stage, the power of that scene. And you can just feel the butterflies and the excitement, and you can hear the crowd and feed off what she's doing. And it's a really cool movie. It's got a lot of different tentacles to it, and I loved it.
Jake and I are both, we both graduated Burnsville High School. You are a legend there, obviously. In 1985, you were the goaltender on the state championship team. What was that experience like? What was it like to win the greatest high school tournament in the world?
Well, from the time I was 5 or 6 years old, I knew what the state tournament was. And growing up, I was an okay student. But my dad kind of put the pressure on me and said, listen, if your grades are up to par and if you're working hard at school, every year on the Thursday of the state tournament, I'm going to get you out of school and get you excused. We're going to drive down there. We're going to go to the day games. We're going to have dinner at a place called Gallivan's in between, which was downtown St. Paul, meet a bunch of his golf pro buddies, and then we go back for the evening session. And so the time I was like literally 6 years old all the way through high school, that was my favorite day on the calendar. I loved Christmas. The birthday was cool. But to me, the Thursday of the state tournament was my very favorite day on the calendar year. And it motivated me to be a hockey player and to hit the books. And so you dreamt about it when you started to play. And, when I was growing up in Burnsville, we had good teams at the youth level. In fact, in our Bantam year, we went to the state championship and ran second. So we knew we had the potential to get back there. And then, Tom Osicki was a legendary coach. They were finding their stride in the early 80s. And a bunch of us that had played together in Pee Wees and Bantams were going to be back together in 85. And so we were the preseason #1 team. And you can look at that a couple of different ways. You can look at that as the kiss of death, or you can look at that as an opportunity. And we played in a tremendous conference. Back then, the Lake Conference had Kennedy at their peak, Jefferson, Minnetonka, Edina. I mean, this conference had 3 or 4 teams in it every year that were good enough to win the state tournament. And so by the time we got to playoffs, we were battle tested. We played in Section 1, where John Marshall and Mayo was our biggest competition, and they were really good. And the year that we had in 85, Apple Valley was one of our rivals all the way through youth hockey. They got upset early in the sectionals. Back then, you had to win 5 games to get to the state because we didn't have a 2-class tournament. We had a 1-class tournament. So in one of the early round games, Apple Valley got upset. So we kind of had our path laid out, and it was a dream come true. It lived up to the hype, right? I mean, you dreamt about it all your life as a kid. You finally get there, and I was a 1-year varsity starter, and I had lost my sophomore year to injury, and so I was really appreciative of the way that season played out. Coach Osicki was phenomenal with us because we had a lot of really strong personalities in that room, and he was the type of guy that demanded respect and did it the right way and got us on track, and we had so much fun. I mean, going down there and getting there was really the big prize. Winning it was the icing on the cake. And it's funny, I come back now and I talk to different kids at different levels in the world of hockey, and every year there's a banquet at Hockey Day Minnesota. And the one thing I always tell them is, make sure you appreciate playing with the guys you grew up with. It's something that you have to cherish. If you're good enough to go where you're going to go, you're going to get there. Never throw away an opportunity to play with your buddies.
Yep.
And there isn't a day that goes by in my life now at age 53. So I'm 35 years removed from that state tournament and that senior year and that fun we had. There's not a day that goes by where I don't flash back at some moment from the day, whether it's a song on the radio, a conversation, an absent thought, where I don't think back to a moment on the bus, a moment in the locker room, a pasta feed, state tournament, where I don't smile about how much fun we had together. And, you know, you text with some of your buddies, and I heard from Marco Siki yesterday, who lives down in Wisconsin, and it always seems to bring you back to such a special time in your life. And, you know, it's remarkable. That tournament to me still has such a prestige to it. And the kids that get there, you know, watching those section finals, it's remarkable. It is just a tournament that stood the test of time. You said it, it's the best high school tournament in the country. And I was very, very fortunate to have a really good group of players to play with and a great coach in Tom Osiki for us to get the job done.
Well, I like how you brought up the high school hockey rankings and how sometimes being number one can be a kiss of death. When I played in 2014 for the Burnsville Blaze, we got to that number one spot just to get upset by Jefferson in the second round of sections. So that really sucked.
And we were seniors. I wasn't playing, but I was
It was
watching.
my senior year, which really sucked. But one thing I've always appreciated about you is every year for Burnsville, you go to the section dinners and you always give a little talk to us. I really love how you give back to the community like that.
Well, I loved it. You know, it was fun because, you know, it brings you back to when you were a player, right? And when you get the chance to visit with some of these teams, and, you know, Burnsville at the top of my list, I'm really proud of the black and gold. And, you know, it was really fun to connect with, whether it was Yanni coaching there, Mike Luckcraft, some of my friends, Frank Senta, that have been a part of that program, to come back and to connect with you guys. And the one thing you have in common is you guys are still, for the most part, still in the same building. And it doesn't matter if it's 85 or 2014 or now 2020. There was something special about putting that jersey on, the big B on the front, playing in that beautiful arena, which, by the way, I went back and watched Burnsville play Blake again this past winter. That building, to me, is still just as beautiful as it was when it first opened. It still has a magical feel when you get inside there. And the night that I picked to go to the game, the band was in there, and how the sound reverberates throughout the Burnsville Ice Center. It's a special place. And so I was very lucky to come back and talk to those players and then watch you guys, you know, because when you talk to a team before sectionals, then you end up always trying to follow game by game how they do. And, you know, Burnsville's had a pretty good run here, even though the numbers are down from what we had in the mid 80s. There have been some really good teams, including this past year where they got to the section final and got beat by an awesome team from St. Thomas Academy. So it's great to see Burnsville still representing back there.
When are you going to use your poll at FSN to get the Burnsville Blaze on Hockey Day in Minnesota?
Yeah, there we go.
I have been bugging these guys from the Wild and FSN on a yearly basis to get it done. And so maybe this coming year, when we're down south in Mankato, we can get it done because I know they want teams from the south. If not, I think Burnsville could host it, to be honest. There's some great spots in Burnsville where they can put that thing on. And I'd even settle for a spot right there at the high school at Dick Hansen Field, Bob Pate Stadium.
That'd be really cool.
Burnsville is God's country, and people that have been through there know how lovely it is. So don't worry. I'm gonna push this through at some point. I've been outvoted, outmanned so far, but I'm not giving up hope.
There you go. Well, yeah, going back to your high school days, it could have been in the state high school championship, but I mean, were there any games when you were playing goalie, you're just like, I am like on fire right now. I'm making saves I have no business making. What is going on? Where you're just in a rhythm.
There were a couple, but to be honest, the team that I played for in 85 didn't give up a ton of shots.
Yeah.
I mean, we gave up 20 shots a night. So there was never a situation where I had to carry the club. I think for me, what I'll remember the most is in the tournament against Hill Murray at a couple critical points, I was able to make a couple of saves where I'm like, okay, I'm not letting because you get so nervous, you get so excited to play that you always wonder if you're going to be able to go out there and do what you're supposed to do. And there were a couple of moments in that game where I was able to do it. And what I look back and I'm most proud of is I was a very middle of the road goaltender that had a really good team in front of me, but I was a team guy, and I would always try to put myself in a position to think about what's best for the team. And early in that third period of our championship game, I let in an awful goal. It was a goal from a sharp angle where I thought I had the net covered. I stood my ground. I got beat to the far post and in. And it was a deflating goal for me and my team because we had carried the 3-2 lead into the third period. We were the heavy favorites against Hill Murray, and they were playing us toe-to-toe. And after that point, there were a couple of different key spots in that game where I made a couple of stabilizing saves, and I just was able to kind of settle myself down. And I'm certain after seeing that bad goal go in, that helped my team believe, okay, he's not going to melt down or cough this thing up, and then just try to buy time. Because the team I played on, guys, if you could put them in a position where you could buy some time, we had star players that were going to make big plays and big moments. That particular night, it was Scott Bloom that made a play late in a hockey game. In fact, it was the closing 27 seconds. And I always knew that I was never going to be the superstar goalie, but I always knew that if I did my job, stopped 90% of the shots, gave the team a chance, that they would take over and they would eventually win the hockey game. And I was much better off the ice with that group than I was on the ice. I was the guy on every road trip when we got done, whether it was close by or far away, go to the front of the bus, take the microphone from the bus driver, and I would lead the team in O Canada when we left the rink after a win. And so there were a lot of big wins on the road that year, including the first ever win at Braemar Arena for a Burnsville varsity team, where I would lead O Canada. So I was the guy, I think, that you talk to Tom Osik and some of our coaching staff, they knew they could depend on me, but I was never going to be the guy that would actually win the game. I was going to be the guy that would get the job done. I was going to be the guy behind the scenes that would keep them loose, have some fun. And I think for goalies, I think that personality, we see it now with Alex Stalock, I do think that matters. And I think that was the bigger contribution I made in 1985 to Burnsville.
Well, being a goalie obviously has to be very mentally straining. You have to have a really quick memory. If you let in a weak goal, you got to forget right away and be ready to make the next save. Because of that, there's this theory out there that a lot of, I'm going to say 85% of goalies out there are just absolutely crazy. Do you agree with that?
I think you have to be a little bit different. I really do. And I part of it is wanting to put the gear on and face those shots every day. You have to be a bit of a different breed to want to do that. And I think it's the personality thing too, because everybody else, you shift on, you shift off. You have a moment to kind of decompress. If you're a goalie in a hockey game, you're mentally checked into everything that's going on from the time the puck drops to the time the horn goes. And so, a lot of us would either sing to ourselves, broadcast to ourselves, do something to kind of pass that time. Because for me, once the play was in your zone, you just reacted, and it was just normal and it felt comfortable. The harder portions were, for me, especially that team you guys referenced, 85, was the downtime when the puck was in the other end, trying to stay into the game, trying not to overthink it. And so you have to have a little bit of goofiness to kind of overcome that, to kind of keep yourself engaged in what you're doing. And, whether I would talk to the pipes to my left or right. I would sing sometimes. I would do play-by-play at practice. You pick up different things to kind of help you along the way. And I think that, every goalie's different. You got real quiet guys, you got real outgoing guys. But I do think that most goaltenders that I've come across in the game of hockey, on the boys' side, the girls' side, either way, have had a touch of the goofball to them to be good.
Well, yeah, I mean, you make good points. I mean, I played goalie growing up, still doing some beer leagues.
Nice.
But I just, one of the things that I would struggle with is, like you mentioned, like when the puck was in the other end, I'd be nervous, like, oh gosh, okay. And then I'd look up at the clock and be like, okay, it's 18 minutes left in the first period. I look down and I look back up, 17, only 4 seconds. I've gone, oh gosh, this is going to be eternity. I'm going to let in a million goals, blah, 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 blah. Stuff like that runs through your head all the time. So you got to be, you got to distract yourself and just focus on the game.
Yeah, the best you can, right? I mean, it's one of those deals where you're at your best when you're not overthinking it. And I think, if you can get to a position where you're calm and where you can just settle in, you're always going to be at your best. And that's why I really believe that goaltenders now that I've watched at the highest level, and I watched Bob Mason deal with these wild goaltenders, the more they can get into a situation where they're flatlining, the better they're going to be. And I think that's what's made Devin Dubnyk a really good goalie. I think it worked with Nicholas Backstrom. And even though Alex Stalock is really outgoing and really a big communicator, if you watch him, though, he never lets the moment get kind of the best of him. He's able to kind of get to that relaxed position where it's just him out there reacting and doing his job. Goaltending is not a position where you want to overthink it a lot. You want to get into good habits. And I think I watch, these NHL guys at the highest level, and Bob Mason's so good at getting them to work on the fundamentals. If you can hammer home those fundamentals, then you just react, and then you just kind of go out there and play the game and let the puck come to you. And the best ones have done it. And I think when I played at my very best, that's the way I played. And if you're a young goalie or if you're coaching young goalies, that's what you kind of want to hammer home is You want to get them into a position where they're not thinking it, where they're not, okay, I've got to go here, I've got to go there. How do I get there? Do I push? Do I block and slide? Just get the habits down, get the fundamentals down, and then just react when it's time. And the good ones do. And that's why they have big performances, because they're not thinking too much. They're just reacting.
Well, speaking of some crazy goalies, what were some of your interactions like with Ilya Bryzgalov when he was on the Wild?
It's funny. We just did the rebroadcast of that Game 7 in Denver from 2014, and he had to come in off the bench for Kemper when Darcy got hurt. He is one of those players that I truthfully feel like I never really got to know. Even though I had numerous conversations with Ilya, he was like legitimately out there, and I couldn't reach him. He was at a different level. He took Goofy beyond anything I had ever seen, and he was fun to cover because every day was an adventure. I think if you talk to his teammates, they'd say the same thing. I don't know that anybody outside of maybe his inner circle, his family, really knows the guy, because he would just play off everything and have fun and go and joke around and say the strangest things. And without a doubt, I mean, there's been some goofballs that have played for the Minnesota Wild, but nobody comes close to that level.
Do you have any favorite interview moments in your whole time with the Minnesota Wild? I'm sure you've interviewed thousands of people by this point.
You know, I do. I think having the chance, even though I messed up a couple times with Crosby, he's my favorite player in the league. And I think everybody that knows me knows that. They give me a hard time about it. But, you know, I have so much respect for a guy like Crosby that's been the face of this league for a long time now, probably a decade. And when you get on the road, you don't always get the top players from the opposition unless there's like a Minnesota connection. You know, the David Backuses and the Bukesteds, those guys will always come and talk to us on FSN because we covered a lot of those guys when they were younger. But for a guy like Crosby, and he's never said no to us in our intermission interviews. Cool. And the interviews have been, and the one time I really screwed up is I had misunderstood some information I got at morning skate that day. And I thought the Penguins were getting their cup ring that night. It wasn't the case. And I asked a question during the interview, and he could have thrown me straight under the bus. And he did. And he covered for me. And it went off, you know, kind of in a seamless fashion. So that stands out to me. And then being able to interview like Dino Niederreiter right after that overtime winner, the playoff game in 2014, and get those raw emotions, hearing the locker room behind us going crazy. Those are moments you remember forever. Those are really special nights. And then back when I covered college hockey on a more frequent basis, watching some of those great Gopher games in North Dakota, that one at the XL Energy Center where Wheeler scored from his belly, to be right between the benches for some of those games. Those are the things you take with and remember. And, you know, I love being right up there with it. I love at the rink not knowing every single night how it's going to play out. And, you know, there are good nights and bad, and it's a heck of a lot more fun to do those interviews off a win. But there have been some really good interviews after losses. I tell Ryan Carter, who's now part of our TV broadcast, that he was one of the best interviews after tough losses, because he wouldn't candy coat it, he wouldn't throw out cliches, and he wouldn't be afraid to throw him and his teammates under the bus. Because to me, you know, a game that stands out was late in his career, late in a Wild season. They got drubbed 7-1 down in Dallas, and I asked for Carter, and he came out, and he gave an outstanding interview. To me, if a viewer is going to watch a post-game show after their team just got their butt whipped 7-1, they don't want to hear a bunch of mumbo jumbo. They'd like to rather hear what really went wrong and what needs to be corrected. And Carter was phenomenal. And to me, those are some of the interviews that I'm most proud of, because those are the ones where you hope to God you can extract something out of it. And because they're difficult times, these guys really, you know, hockey's one of those games where there's so much emotion involved in it that even if it's a regular season game, you go out and get beat by 6 goals, it's tough to come out there and, you know, give a good interview. But he did on a consistent basis. Matt Cullen, another guy who's one of my favorites, that win or lose was always just a fantastic guy to talk to.
Yeah. And going off from that, this might be one of the reasons why, I mean, you love your job so much, is this interviewing the players, interacting with them. But now that we've been away from hockey now over a month now, and what is something that you miss most about your job that's really making this quarantine hard, that you're really looking forward to get back to when this ends?
To me, it's the conversations in between the games at practice when you're at the rink, when you kind of get to really sit down and talk to the guys, and whether it's about their craft and what they're working on, you know, specifically to get ready for the next game, or whether it's something where they ask you about your kids and vice versa, and you talk about family or you talk about a sporting event that doesn't pertain to hockey. To me, it's the time in between. It's the travel. It's the camaraderie we have with our group that we travel with and with those players that we know so well that I miss the most. And I was talking to Alex Stalock by a text last weekend. I just miss being around the rink. All my life, whether it's been as a player, as a coach, or now a broadcaster, I've always had the rink as kind of my special place where I can go hang out every day. And I miss it. I miss being around the guys. I miss being around the rink. And, when we get back to doing this again, hopefully sooner rather than later, I'm not going to take it for granted, especially at age 53. I don't know how much longer I'll get to do this, but I'll tell you one thing. When you lose something like that, you probably, during the course of the season, some days don't always feel like going there. Some days you're like, oh, here we go again. It's bad weather. I got to drive down to St. Paul. Now you really start to think, man, what I wouldn't give to go watch practice this morning, right?
Exactly. Well, Kevin, we're running short on time here, but before we let you go, you may have been watching, but we want to do our signature rapid fire segment with you that we've been doing here at 10,000 Takes for every guest. At the end of the interview, where we ask you some crazy would you rather or hypothetical questions. Are you ready to go for that?
Sounds great.
Awesome. All right, so the first one is, would you rather spend the rest of your life blind or in an Olive Garden?
Olive Garden. I love pasta.
Yeah.
There you go. The breadsticks too. Oh. If you were given an all expenses paid trip to Cleveland, would you take it?
Absolutely, I would. Great ballpark. Hope it'd be summertime so I could go watch some outdoor baseball, but I would definitely take it. It's free, right? Doesn't cost anything.
Nope.
I'll find some fun there near the ballpark for sure.
There you go. Now, is it pronounced hot dish or casserole?
For me, it's always been hot dish. From the time I was a kid, my mom would say, hey, I've got a hot dish in the oven. And, growing up in the 70s and 80s, there was nothing better.
I agree 100%. If a movie was made about your life, who would play you?
George Costanza from Seinfeld. Same hairline, sadly, same build. I could play him. He could play me.
That's awesome. Awesome. Would you rather have the head the size of a tennis ball or the size of a watermelon?
Well, I'm much closer to the watermelon, so I'd take that. Maybe I'd get more brain power. I'd be better at my job. Be better at handicapping the horses.
There you go. Minneapolis or St. Paul?
Ooh. Both have so many great places to go. I got to give the nod to St. Paul. I went to college at St. Thomas. That's where the XL Energy Center is. They're both wonderful places, but I give the edge to St. Paul.
There you go. Great reasons, though. In self-defense, how many fifth graders could you fend off at one time?
Well, I know I can't outrun them.
Yeah.
I'd say maybe 2 if I'm lucky.
Wow. I'd like to say, and we've been saying this to other people, Paul Allen said he could take on an entire school, which doesn't surprise us. So.
Well, I disagree with Paul, but he is pretty feisty.
Yeah. Yep, definitely. Would you rather wear a shirt that's kind of itchy all the time or wear a pair of shoes that have a small pebble in it?
The itchy shirt. For me, the pebble in the shoe, I can't do it. It drives me bananas.
Same here.
That's been our most mixed question, our most controversial question of the entire weekend. What's more realistic, ghosts or aliens?
Oh, aliens for sure. I 100% believe that they're out there. I haven't come in contact with any.
Right.
And
that you know
they
of.
might both be around. I mean, who knows? Yeah. But I would say aliens.
Awesome. You have one sport to watch the rest of your life. What is it?
It's hockey.
Yep.
100%. That's the right answer. That's what we said to Russo. It's the right answer. Some people might be mad at that. So, but Kevin, we're running to the end of time here. Again, we thank you so much for coming on for a great cause. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Guys, I really appreciate what you're doing. It's a huge undertaking. The time you're putting in, the efforts. We all really are very fortunate to have you guys doing this. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. And black for power, gold for excellence. Burnsville forever, boys.
There we go. We'll definitely stay in contact if we want you on anything else in the future.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Bye.
Bye.